Adaptation's a movie that general audiences seem to love, which I know is not saying a lot. People have bad taste in movies. But people always remember three different things in this movie. It's either the Bob Marley song Three Little Birds, the action scenes, or when the dog dies. It's also one of the highest grossing movies of all time, and you're always going to find it listed among the best apocalypse movies. However, this movie sucks.
No!
And it's mostly because of how it handles the source material. But I'll get more into that later. Let's just see why this movie's so bad in general, and how it should be seen as one of the worst adaptations ever made. What's interesting is that you're never going to find this movie listed among the worst adaptations. And part of the reason I think that is that people haven't read the book. And if you aren't familiar with the book, it was published in 1954 and was written by this man, Richard Matheson, who famously wears this hat. It was also one of the first stories to introduce the idea of a worldwide apocalypse, and we all know how popular those have become in recent years. The first time I read this story was around 2 or 3 years ago after this small YouTuber recommended it, and I immediately fell in love with the story. And after a while I sat down to watch the movie. Because I heard about it, people said it's a good apocalypse movie, you should watch it. So I said, okay, I'll watch it. I read the book, let me watch the movie now. And good God, was it terrible. And the issue came in 3 different parts. It's the characters, the monsters, and the ending, along with overall plot issues throughout. So I'm going to go through each of them and talk about why it's so bad. So for the first issue, the characters, is that none of them appear in the book at all. None of them except for Robert, portrayed by Will Smith. There is no Anna and Ethan, and sadly for those who love the dog Samantha, she's not in the book. There is a stray that Robert finds, but then it dies a chapter later, so it's who really cares? But it's nothing like how the movie would have you believe. But you're probably wondering why. Why does any of this matter? Who cares if Robert has some more characters to interact with? Well, it's because it takes away from the point of the book. The point of the book is that he deals with personal issues and tries to come to terms with being alone. I mean, just look at the back of the book. Last living man on Earth. It's right there. He's alone. He's supposed to be. And that leads us to the next point. If none of these other characters exist, let's talk about the one that does, Robert. So as I said, Robert's lonely. He's an alcoholic who spends most of his time surviving and sulking around. The book has him deal with different issues like his defenses constantly breaking, him attending to his daily needs like growing garlic or brushing his teeth and flossing. Which, admittedly, it does sound lame at first, I'm not going to deny. But it makes a good point that if something like his teeth go bad, he can't just go to a dentist. It's the little things like that in Apocalypse that matter. And he also spends a lot of time worrying about the generator that powers his house. The movie wanted something more of an action film, and I Am Legend is not an action book. There's not a lot that happens in it. But movie Robert seems to have it all figured out. He has food, metal barricades, and there's only a few small scenes where you can see his loneliness shine through. There are some similarities, like remembering their families or the world before this all happened, but the movie skips out on the lasting effects this has on Robert. That's why I like the inclusion of some of the scenes when he talks to mannequins, because it shows that he's not entirely there. It's a little bit of human still in him. And this goes even further in the book, because instead of Anna and Ethan, there's a character, Ruth, who shows up at the end, and her introduction makes a lot more sense to the plot and development of the story. But we're going to talk about that later. The book is more of a character study about how one man alone survives an apocalypse and how he handles it. Which I don't see why the movie couldn't follow that plot. I mean, just look at fucking Castaway with Tom Hanks. He spends the whole movie on a deserted island with nothing but a volleyball to talk to. And everyone loves that movie. So I don't see why they couldn't just have Will Smith surviving. If they want to have Samantha with him, that's fine. But why were the inclusion of all these other characters necessary? So, how did Anna and Ethan get added to the story if they weren't in the book? Instead of just me complaining the whole time about it, I have two different theories as to how. The first is that it was meant to be a blockbuster, and adding these characters just makes for more interactions and higher stakes. But that's a boring answer and I don't really care for it. What I think is just as likely is that Will Smith's ego changed the film.
Uh-oh, Richard! Oh, wow! Wow! Will Smith just smacked the shit out of me.
But what do I mean by that? I remember reading a long time ago an article about how Will Smith turned down the role for Django in Django Unchained. And while unrelated to I Am Legend, his response gives insight into his mindset. He talks about how he wanted the story to be more of a love story than vengeance, and how Django wasn't the leading role to him, Dr. King Schultz was in his mind. And Smith wanted to be the one to kill the bad guy. Which is a simple enough reasoning, that's what he wanted, it's fine. But keep that in mind as we go forward. So in an interview with the screenwriter of the movie, Akiva Goldsman, he said, "I think you have to be reasonably nimble as a filmmaking collaborative to try to process and incorporate new ideas. And as we move forward, we steal amply from both objects in order to try to create whatever this version of the story was." He's referring to I Am Legend the book and the Omega Man adaptation. So let's put two and two together. We have a writer who changes source material during the film process, and an influential actor who needs to be the hero of a story. And in this context, the inclusion of Anna and Ethan makes a lot more sense. They needed Robert to be the hero in this movie, because in the book, he isn't one. In fact, he's more of the villain. So let's talk about that. When talking about villains or monsters, fans of the book may realize that I haven't mentioned the biggest change to this movie, which is that there are no vampires. There's none to be seen at all. We get these weird zombie creatures called Darkseekers.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
And this is problematic because the entire point of the book is that there are vampires. Just like the entire point of the book is that Robert's alone. I seriously don't understand how they got away with this. It's not even hidden in the book. They say the creatures are vampires outright. It's even on the cover. The only thing Darkseekers and vampires have in common is that they can't go in direct sunlight. They seem to travel and sleep in herds, and there's very little known about them. And this is a big deal that it got changed. In the book, Robert's obsessed with finding out about how vampires survive and if the lore around them is true, even going back to read Bram Stoker's Dracula. He asks questions like, why does garlic repel them? Why can't they look at crosses? Why do wooden stakes kill them? Why do they die when exposed to sunlight? And each of these questions get explored in a fun way and answered slowly over the course of the novel. And it wouldn't be so bad if the movie changed the creatures but kept the same type of questions and exploration, but they didn't. It's just Will Smith sitting in his lab mixing his potions together. In both versions though, we do get to see them kidnap the creatures and experiment on them, which is interesting to see in both mediums. But the biggest crime is how this film doesn't have any progression when it comes to the Darkseekers. The book is different, however. The vampires are Robert's neighbors. One even calls out his name during the night to taunt him. There's also women who try to lure him out during sex. It plays more into the psychological factor that the movie entirely misses out on. There's vampires outside his house taunting him, trying to kill him, and he hears it constantly. So there's a connection there. But the movie also skips out on the evolution of the vampires as well. In the novel, the vampires start off as very primal creatures, almost like animals. They're out to kill, just like the Darkseekers in the film, to be fair. But as the book progresses, Robert meets Ruth, who I mentioned earlier. While he's out hunting, he sees a woman walking around in daylight, which just that itself is shocking to read because for the entire book, we've just been with Robert. He later realizes and is informed in an amazing moment that the vampires have made their own civilization because the bacteria that caused this mutated. They have evolved into being indistinguishable from humans, and that builds up to the climax. The film also builds up to the climax where the Darkseekers are rushing into Robert's house, where he, Anna, and Ethan are trapped inside the lab. So let's talk about each ending. The ending to Richard Matheson's book is so fucking good that I still think about it to this day. And it's a shame that the movie fucked it up so bad. To set it all up, Book Robert has just discovered that the vampires have mutated and evolved into more human-like beings. The woman from before, Ruth, told him to leave because the community be coming after him. But he doesn't. He stays home. So they capture Robert and bring him to a jail cell overlooking a courtyard. And in this courtyard, there's just vampires awaiting for his execution. As Robert looks out onto the sea of vampires, he comes to many realizations. The first is that he was unaware that there were two different types of vampires, the primal and the civilized. He killed both without a thought. The second is that he's been reading and studying about the legends of vampires, which humans once feared, but the tables have now turned, leaving him to become the legend who's preying on and killing the new species of the world. They look at him the same way he looks at them, as a ruthless monster. He is their legend. And it's such an amazing ending because the title then makes sense. I am legend. He is their legend. But the movie makes a Hail Mary pass attempt to get that as far away from them as possible. They don't want anything to do with it. The movie has Robert giving Anne and Ethan the cure to the disease that caused Darkseekers, and he sacrifices himself with a grenade to save them. Then Anne and Ethan make their way to a survivor camp where they give the cure to the military, and Robert's story will be a legend amongst the people. Now, to be fair to the movie, there is an alternate ending, which is known about, that has the Darkseekers coming to rescue their kidnapped friend or wife or whoever it was. And then they dip. It's kind of similar to the ending of the novel, where we see a more human side to them, and we see how Robert could be more of a villain. But they decided to cut that ending, so I'm not going to count it, because they wanted to go for something more happy for the general audience. So it doesn't count. And yet, the funny thing is, they have to use this alternate ending anyway to set up the sequel. It doesn't make any sense if they don't use this alternate ending. And they didn't want to use it in the first place. The director even said that they're going to have to go back to the source material on this book. But making a sequel in the first place goes against what the book means, the message of it. The making of this movie is just so interesting. They literally took nothing from the book except the title, and even that they fucked up. There's no reason why this could be called I Am Legend. If they titled it something different, I would think this movie is okay. It's an okay apocalypse movie. But since it is called I Am Legend, I can see how they royally fucked everything up. If you're interested in an I Am Legend movie, you can watch Last Man on Earth, which follows the book more closely, or you can watch The Omega Man, which is not very similar, but it just looks so goofy and bizarre. It's always fun to go online and read about how movies fucked up their adaptation. I've been on Reddit and I've seen people make posts about how I Am Legend is terrible and all the nitpicks they have, and I love reading those because I hate this movie so much. But that's all I had to talk about for today. So if you liked the video, please subscribe, please like, and leave a comment about a movie, TV show, video game that you want me to talk about. I just don't want to do critiques. I want to talk about things I love, video essays. So let me know what you think and if you like it. And I'll see you next time.